Welcome to Deep Dive. My name is Jeff Robinson, back in the studio with a special guest, Pastor Tim Flowers.
Well, I consider it an honor to be here with you. There's a lot of people that I highly respect that are normally here, so very thankful to be invited.
Well, glad you're here, Tim. And I think this is your second time on Deep Dive. Last time we walked through, I think it was our series on stewardship. And we're going to be talking about some great steps that God has laid before us as a church. And so if you guys don't know Tim, Tim is our executive pastor. If you come from a corporate background like our COO, the one who helps us implement and take the steps and be efficient in what we do for God's glory. So Tim, love you. It's an honor to serve with you and glad that you're here today because you're going to be able to give us some insight on where we're going to be starting this October 16th, our first of 4 messages on Forward. Now, some people have talked to me about how I pronounce that. Our sermon series is Forward, Strengthen, Build, Go. But I get excited talking about it just because of how this is built up for so long, what the steps that we've needed to take as a church family for many, many years. We're just here now. But I get excited, Tim, when I say Forward instead of Forward. And some people say, well, you're saying like Ford Fix or Repair Daily, like the vehicle, or like Chevy? What are you talking about? So we're talking about going forward as a church family. And so, Tim, let's just talk a little bit about this initiative. And we're going to be laying this out in detail of what's really going to encompass a large part of our focus for the next 2 years. Forward is being strengthen, building, and going. So forward, strengthen, build, go. Most people, you say, hey, man, that sounds great. Like, we don't ever want to go backwards. We always want to go forward. But talk to us a little bit just with the details of what are we talking about when we refer to strengthen?
Yeah, I think with what we're referring to is we're strengthening not just things here on campus, but there's a lot of the intricacies that go into what happens at a church that we're strengthening, like our systems, for example. So one of the famous sayings that we lean towards is, with growth comes complexity, and then the natural enemy to growth is complexity. And so making things better as we grow. This is one of my favorite movies is The Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. The thing with grace is they're already coming. We need to build the infrastructure for the people that are already coming to know Christ, coming to be a part of our faith family. And so as we're growing, we're taking some of that complexity out of it, and we're building in systems and building in processes that will allow for that growth to happen. Now, there's a lot of details in that. There's things here on the property. If you've ever been to South Florida, you know that there's a thing called a canal. And typically you have very few entrances and exits over across canals, and so we're in one of those situations. And then the other thing is, if you've been here on a Sunday morning lately, parking can be an issue. And so systems like parking.
Right. Yeah. Now, if you are an early bird and you get here early for the 8:30 service, you usually don't have maximum parking issues. But just to give you guys a flyover, and again, when we get to our series beginning on October 16th, we're going to go into detail about all this. But what we're looking at as far as a church initiative is we're going to widen, by God's grace and by God's strength, the entrance and exit to our property. Now, if you've already been on campus, you know there is a new eastbound exit. If you are coming around the back of the worship center, and then you're right there next to the preschool playground area, you can now go right. That carries you across our property here, that carries you across our property next door, that connects to the apartment complex next door, and that's a legal egress onto Okeechobee Boulevard. We want to be legal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we're looking at increasing or widening our entrance exit right here for Okeechobee Boulevard to help people getting on and off the process in an organized way, and also a number of extra parking spaces through this initiative. How many are we looking at, Tim?
300 plus at this point.
Okay, so because again, we're grateful for what God has done, but we've experienced lids on our property in terms of parking accessibility. If you've been here on campus, you know that I just demoted myself. That's a powerful seat. We've been parking on the the soccer field right behind our current worship center for years and years, which has been great that we've had that. But it can turn into Okeechobee Mudfest. We also have a school, Berean Christian school, that we play soccer on and all sorts of activities. So we've been able to tell us about the field next door that we've
So part of that
there.
So part of that is we want to say thank you to the people that have parked on in key times, so the 10 o'clock hour, the 11:30 hour. We want to say thank you to the people who actually park on the field. That allows us to park brand new people and first-time guests and others that can't walk across the field in key places across campus to allow them to come to a worship service. But one of the downsides to that is when it is Okeechobee Mudfest, when it does rain, we end up with issues where we actually destroy the field, and that field was dual use. Since then, we've actually installed a field on the property to the west. And so there's a brand new field sitting over there. New fence is scheduled to come in at the time of this filming, just a matter of 6 weeks away. And so we've got a new fence coming in. That field is in place. We've already got a new bridge towards the south of the property to be able to access that field. And so we're prepped for the new parking lot. It's just a matter of time to start.
So there's that strengthen our systems, what we currently have, and there's also build. Currently, and those of you who have kids or grandkids, you've experienced this. Currently, we have Tim, 3 different drop-off locations for ages 0 through 5th grade?
Yeah, depending on the age of your kid, you're going to have to go through 3 different check-in and drop-off locations to be able to drop your kids off. And so one of those is a temporary setup. It's a setup tear-down inside of our gym. Again, with dual use of the school, that means anybody that's been involved with the athletic program, that means athletics has to stop early, get ready for the weekend, has to stop early on Wednesday nights, get ready for that. And then it's set up and tear down for the church, which is, it served us well. But in order for us to continue to grow, what got us here is not going to be what gets us there. And so what we're looking at doing is building a dedicated children's space
right behind our current worship center. And again, when we get to the series, we're going to be diving into more details on that.
You can't give away all the details now.
Yeah, because normally, like, if you're a regular deep diver, like if you are a part of this monthly viewership, you're looking like deep dive into philosophy and theology and, the new atheism, or now I guess it's the not so new atheism and issues of biblical teaching on sexuality and all of these deep dive topics that relate to what we normally teach through on a Sunday morning. But we're going to take a deep dive in our sermon series on Forward just to take a step back and say, yes, we fully acknowledge and we believe that the church is not the buildings.
That's right.
Like Jesus did not die for a strip on a parking lot, right?
That's right.
Jesus did not die for paint. Jesus died for people. We are the church, but we also know that God has given us minds, and we find references in Scripture that speak to just basic practical realities that the buildings and the parking serve a purpose to serve the church as we move forward to make an impact in Palm Beach County, South Florida, and the world. And so what we're looking at, again, is strengthening what we have, widen our entrance and exit, create, define, solidify an opportunity for somebody to be able to park. Because unless you rode here on a horse, or unless you walked or rode a bicycle, like, everybody needs a place to park. And as strong Christians, man, we know this. If you're a strong Christian watching this, and by the way, we have many people who are checking out Christianity for the first time that regularly consume content online from Grace or here on Sundays. But just a word to our strong Christians, we know that we should be willing to give our very lives for the sake of the gospel. We know that by the grace of Christ, if that day ever comes, He gives us the strength to not wilt under the pressure even of death. But when it comes to helping people who may be attending church for the very first time, like, we want to make room for more people. We don't want to raise a level of maturity and press that upon them if they've not yet had a chance to even hear the gospel for the first time. That's irrational.
Right. We want the gospel to fall on good soil.
Yeah.
And so the irritation of coming through a bad system for parking or an irritating system through parking and not being able to find a parking space, and then having to take 20, 30 minutes to check in and then come in, that's a lot of barriers that can be set up. And this is our opportunity to remove some barriers to allow people to hear gospel sometimes for the first time. Here in South Florida, that's one of the things that we've noticed is a lot of times this is brand new to people.
Yes.
Brand new to people.
Yes.
And so removing as many of those barriers as possible. It's not about the building, and I 100% agree with that. It is not about the building. But the buildings that people have built here on this campus that came way before us. I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of giants.
That's right.
So the buildings that are here now are serving a purpose for generations and generations and generations. We're here seeing God move through these buildings.
Yes, and we're going to have some fun acknowledging and honoring those who were here at Grace during the 1990s, spilling over into the new millennium, who were part of the Find Us Faithful campaign that actually, through God's work in men and women's lives, led them to give, led them to pray, to support, so that like we're actually in the building right now. And so, and I know most of the Christians, I would hope, watching this understand these things. We're just saying what everybody already understands. But there can be some who say, you know, the buildings don't have a place in church life. And like, all right, awesome. If you want to be consistent, you meet outside every time you gather. If you want to be consistent, don't critique a building inside a building. Right? And so, but that's not who we are. We're not a complaining church. We're not a trying to find fault church. This is just an incredible opportunity that God has already brought. And one of our great couples here at Grace said early on, we were talking through some of these things, said, you know what, and to reference your movie, Tim, this is not Field of Dreams. Build it and hope that they will come. This is as we are still opening up here in South Florida. And I know for some folks watching in a different region, man, you've been fully open. Everybody's been fully out for a long time. We're still in that process. This is not build it and they will come. By God's grace, people have found Christ. They've found Grace online and then made their way here. And then some of our faithful, awesome Love Jesus members are still making their way back in person.
That's right.
And so we're already experiencing a lot of these acute challenges in terms of space. And we don't just want to think from a day-to-day perspective. We want to think not just in a 5-year plan, but what's going to set the stage and maximize this footprint, this forward operating base for the next 20, 30 years by God's grace.
So you've covered 2 of the handlebars, strengthen and build. So go. What's the opportunity with go then?
Yeah. So go would tie right back into what Jesus said, his last statement: "Go into all the world and make disciples." And so that idea of what we do here as a church with our ongoing mission support, our involvement, and we're looking to do more international trips here in the future. All of that ties together with what we do to reach Palm Beach County, South Florida, and the world with the good news of Jesus Christ. We want to do that from a place of strength. To pray that the Lord gives us the power of the Spirit, that he gives us his anointing to do what he's called us to do. But we also believe that God gives us minds. In the scriptures, there are men of Issachar in the Old Testament who understood the times. In the New Testament, we see men and women who God gave tremendous wisdom to. And we have, by God's grace, tapped into so much of that here at Grace to make plans today. Because sometimes in church life, we can be all about, well, I want to be led by the Spirit. Well, depends on what you mean by that. If by that you mean I refuse to plan, I refuse to make wise decisions, I refuse to walk in wisdom, that's not being led by the Spirit. That's being led by the spirit of laziness. And that doesn't come from God. So we want to go, but whatever that looks like in the future, and that can take many forms, we want to do that from a place of maximum strength. So from this location here on Okeechobee Boulevard, man, take off those lids as best we can, and as God's people get behind that process. And so again, we're going to be getting into a lot of those details in the weeks to come. And if you're whether you're local or whether you follow Grace from afar, I would really strongly encourage you to be here beginning on October 16th for the next 4 weeks. Because these will, not because I'm going to be preaching those messages, not because I'm, the pastor here, but just because of where we've been for a long time building up to this. Man, we were right there before 2020 hit and COVID hit. And then, for the past couple of years, we've tried to, just be there for one another and try to reach our friends with the gospel, as we will continue to do. But in terms of these big macro discussions on really an overhaul of this and an enhancement of this property, we're here now.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
It's going to be great. And again, October 16th, we will be moving forward. So we invite you to be there for that. But before that, we're going to be finishing up our Shipwrecked series. Yeah. And so, Tim, we're going to be talking about possessiveness with King David and King Saul. Really the dynamic before David was king and while Saul was still king, and just the hyper insecurity that was just exuding from King Saul. If you can, just give us a perspective just from your background in training and leading people and leading teams, creating a good culture that's applicable not just to church, not just to a Christian school, but also to those who are serving in a business environment. What is possessiveness, and why is it damaging to relationships or even a good culture? And where do we kind of see that in the relationship between David and King Saul?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, even the way that you put that. You know, it's King David and King Saul. Yeah. So there is the king that is in place, King Saul, that has been anointed by the people. And then you have King David that's in waiting. He's the one that's been anointed by the prophet. Right. To take over next. Right. And so there's going to be a succession at some point. It's already there. And it's interesting to see the way that these two leaders look at that. Saul, I think, comes at it from this possessiveness. He comes at it from a scarcity mindset. He looks at it a little bit like with a lot of jealousy. With you could see this abuse come in. WebMD even gives some signs of possessiveness, and abuse is a part of that. Typically, it's a lot of paranoia. It's a lot of like everything's focused on me and me and how I feel and what is this doing to me and what is this doing to my reputation. If you look at possessiveness and then look it up, it lines up with narcissism too. There's a lot of the same tendencies in both places. But overall, I think it comes from a scarcity mindset. You flip that coin and look at it the way David looks at it. I mean, David's looking at it from a perspective of he's God's anointed. He's in that position. It's not my turn yet. He had opportunities to overthrow him. And even though his character didn't line up, God must know something I don't know. And so instead of trying to take every opportunity to promote self, he took every opportunity to follow God. And so it was not a self-promoting. It wasn't a scarcity mindset. He was making sure he was taking care of his people and making sure that they were okay. And he was trying to honor God. Even though Saul at the moment was trying to kill him because he's going nuts, basically.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are incredible insights there, Tim, that we can all apply to our life. But here's something I don't know if any of us can fully control, is those initial feelings of fear or insecurity, like what happened with Saul. Right. He saw David succeed. David killed the giant. Saul didn't kill a giant. All of the lady singers there were singing that song. I don't know if it was like To the Eye of the Tiger or not, or if it was, to a Bee Gees tune. I have no idea. But they were saying that Saul has slain his thousands, but David,
tens of thousands.
Yeah. And Saul did not like that. So I think we've all been, in a sense, where Saul has been, to where somebody else is succeeding at something that is relevant to our life. Yeah. If we're into singing, or if we're into teaching, or if we're into being an entrepreneur, whatever it may be, investing on the side, just straight up promotion. Yeah. Like they got it and we didn't get it. We've all felt something like that. But if I hear what you're saying, it's what we do with that. Absolutely. It's what we speak to that. Yeah. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. There are certain things that are inside of our control. And most of those have to do with our actions and our reactions. And there's some things that are outside of control. I mean, what's inside of our control is we can control how hard we work and what we focus on to get that promotion. It's outside of our control if we actually get the promotion or not. That's outside of our control. So we can control those things, that those actions, those reactions. But it's important to identify where those thoughts come from. Okay, did this come from God, or is this a selfish motivation? So understanding where those thoughts come from. And I think that's where Saul made the mistake is he's going to be succeeded at some point. Somebody is going to take that throne at some point.
That's right.
I mean, the positions that we have, we will not be in these positions forever. Someone will take these seats. It's just, are we in a position to where it's going to be a healthy transition or an unhealthy transition? And so you want to focus on the things that you can control, that God has put in your hands to be able to control, because there's a lot of things that aren't. And Saul was so focused on things that were not in his control that he made it a very unhealthy transition.
And really, we see Saul was miserable.
He really was.
Like, he's kind of doing all of that, the possessiveness, the insecurity, to hang on to, at least I think in his mind, to hang on to power. And if he hangs on to power, then he's going to be happy, as opposed to, left with nothing. But we see him absolutely, completely miserable. And I think we've seen versions of that throughout our life with, the older that we get, or even a different season in our life, we may not be doing the same role in the same way with, the same level or whatever it may be, but being okay with giving it away. And that's the gospel, right? The gospel is not for whatever we can accumulate to ourselves, but it's what we can give away to others. And so there's so much that we can learn in Scripture based upon what we should be about. And then there's a whole lot in Scripture. It's like, hey, man, I'm going to be very effective for God, I think, by His grace, not because I know it all, if I do the opposite of what that dude did or what she did. And so we're looking forward to getting into that discussion of David and Saul. And then there's another character that's going to wrap up our series. We thought it be a heartwarming note to wrap up our series on the topic of stubbornness with Nabel and Abigail.
So for people who don't know that story, recap that story.
Yeah. So I know this is deep dive, but we're gonna deep dive in the sermon as well, hopefully. But Nabal was this guy that, according to the Scriptures, nobody could even talk to him. He literally would not listen to anyone. Would not. He was rude. He was a jerk. He was the type of guy that would just leave 1-star reviews for everybody else in his life. But his wife, Abigail, we don't know if Nabal got this way after he was married, if he did what some guys do, put on a good face, convince a really nice girl to marry them, and then after they're married, the guy shows who he really is, type of thing, or if this is sort of the way Nabal always was, and Abigail saw him as a project. We really don't know, a project that she didn't actually end up working on. But the destructive power of stubbornness, Nabal ticks off a group of David's guys to the point, it was to the point overboard, that they were all right, we're going to come and just take names and we're just going to wipe them all out. Abigail takes Proverbs 15:1 to heart, that a soft answer turns away wrath.
That's right.
And she intervenes in that situation. She humbles herself in lieu of her husband. And so the destructive power of stubbornness is we don't know it all. I don't know it all. None of us do. So taking the understanding that God is God, that only He's the one who understands it all. So therefore, leading our teams, leading our families, and by God's grace and God's help, leading ourselves to where we don't have to be stubborn. Because if I know that I'm wrong, but I still want to hold on to trying to help everybody else think that I'm right, everybody else knows that I'm wrong anyway.
That's right.
So it's actually a way not to be manipulative, but it's a way to actually get further and to help our teams and our families and our relationships progress, as opposed to holding on to something and just being so bullheaded. But we know we're wrong and everybody else knows that we are. And the longer we stay in a place of stubbornness, it's actually the more that we lose.
Yeah.
But the logic of stubbornness says that if you let everybody else know that that person was right and you were wrong on this point, then you're going to lose their respect. But it's actually the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It makes people want to hang out with us. It makes people want to do business with us. It makes people want to be around us. So what have you seen just in your life and ministry and leadership in terms of stubbornness, and how that can be so counterproductive when it actually lies to us and says that that's the way to attain and retain power?
Yeah, I think you see this in Nabal. It's stubbornness and pride. And then in the opposite, you see Abigail with humility.
That's right.
So a lot of times in a leadership position, people who are stubborn or who are set, they don't want to listen, and people know that, and they don't tell them things. So Abigail had a little bit more information because she had people coming back telling her and say, hey, David and David's men actually protected all of Nabal's stuff. Right. So Nabal didn't even have the full story because he was so stubborn he wouldn't even listen. So I think that happens a lot of times. We think that we know the answer and we think that we know the best way, and we don't listen to the people around us. A lot of times the people that are working within our organizations are the ones who know the answer already and know the best way, and they absolutely know the process, and they probably have more information. Are we willing to listen? Are we willing to spend that moment to listen? I think you're a great example of the way to do this. Best idea wins. That's something that comes up in our meetings all the time. Best idea wins. Doesn't matter wherever it comes from. All right. Here's what we're thinking about doing. Here's some of the obstacles. Best idea wins. Let's talk it through. And no matter where the best idea comes from, celebrate that idea, move forward. Because if you have more information, you can make better decisions. He wasn't even willing to listen.
Nope, because he was the man.
He was the man.
He had the chair. He had the position.
And he was comfortable.
He is Nabal.
And he was comfortable.
Absolutely. He was the boss. He was the paterfamilias. He was the man. And that is so deadly.
Yeah.
Like, even for those of us, and God may have given us for a season or maybe for a long time, a position or a seat of authority, of influence, that is not for us to just sit and soak and say, because I am and because I have this title with 3 letters in it, and therefore you all do what I say or else. Man, that's the beginning. Every time a leader does that, they're essentially taking a sledgehammer to the very foundations of what they're leading and just slamming away at it.
100%. And you see that, like, Abigail's humility was rewarded. She was given a place of prominence.
That's right.
Nabal, David didn't have to, or he didn't have to come in and kill him. God struck his health, and he died a short time later.
That's right. You know what's fascinating about that is, like, literally there in the Hebrew, basically when the truth was finally shared with him, because he actually opened up his ears enough to listen to it, it said his heart became like a stone.
Because he finally realized everything that was happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he had been a stonehead for so long, like just a rock, not being able to listen or willing to hear a different point of view. And finally his heart kind of became what his heart was all along.
Imagine what that would be like if he actually would have listened. Because he was already a jerk, but God was still providing for him through David and his people, taking care of all of his stuff.
Right.
Even when he was far from God, God was taking care of him.
That's God's mercy.
God's mercy. And when he came in, if he would have actually listened, but he didn't listen. He just refused to actually listen.
But think about that, even from just like a connection, strategy, networking perspective. David's guys were watching out for Nabal's flocks of animals. If Nabal had extended just a basic level of thank you, or even more so, to say, hey, what can I do for you guys? There could have been a connection to David's team of troops. It was actually an international force. I wouldn't use the word mercenary, but yeah, of mighty men. And here's the thing. They were on the incline. Like they were going places. If he would have been able to, just through humility, serve people on that level, there's no telling what could have been a positive net gain for Nabal and Nabal's, Nabal Inc., like his entire business. And so we see so much in Scripture that's positive in the sense of emulate this, like even Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But there's so much that we can gain, especially in this Shipwrecked series, by looking at these stories in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, of people that were just fools. Yeah. And we don't have to end up as a shipwreck. Like we don't have to end up as a Nabal.
Yeah, we don't have to wreck those relationships.
That's right.
Whether there be a brand new introduction to that or established relationship. Yeah. Man, I'm enjoying the series. I'm looking forward to these.
It's been a lot of fun. And I'll tell you what, for our fans of Romans, obviously we love Romans, but being able to preach through these narratives, these stories, has just been so much fun. Because I mean, Romans, it's deep, it's awesome, it's rewarding. There's creatine and protein all through that, but it is a grind to just, especially Romans 10 and 11, so much history. Again, it's rich and rewarding, but some of these Old Testament narratives, it's just right there. It's a story that kind of comes down to like this vortex that it all spins and rotates on, and it's super fun to engage with. So, Tim, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us on Deep Dive. Again, we're so grateful to so many of you being with us every single month to engage with these questions and with this content. And again, on October 16th, we're excited to embark on going forward. Not forward, but forward. Strengthen, build, and go. So if you're a member of Grace or if you're a regular attender, engage with us. If you can just be in prayer for that. Be in prayer for me as we present what God has brought us to and the steps that we can all take as a church going forward. It's going to be truly, truly remarkable and what God has planned for us as a church. And if you are looking to plug in at Grace, let us know. Send us an email, info@gograce.church, or just hop on our website, gograce.church, because, Tim, there's like 5 million Grace Fellowships.
There's a lot of Grace Fellowships out there.
Okay. Which, again, if God leads you to connect to another, if you look up Grace Fellowship and he leads you, I don't know, somewhere like in the middle of Utah, maybe God's sovereignty. But if you want to connect here, Grace Fellowship, a church for all nations, Okeechobee Boulevard, West Palm Beach, let us know. And it's just an honor to serve alongside you, Tim, and our team and our leadership at Grace. And it's just an awesome, awesome time. We actually had Sunday before last, a total of 30 people go forward following Jesus and believers' baptism by immersion. And that's just a huge thing to us because that's a huge thing in Scripture. Absolutely. And to be baptized the way that Jesus was baptized, into the water and out of the water. And if you have questions on that, what it means to become a follower of Jesus, or really for some of us that were raised with a Christian background, even a quasi-Christian background, and we're wanting to, just get involved in a local church or learn more, meet people in a Christian context, just let us know. We'd love to get you connected. And you can just go to our website, gograce.church, and there's Next Steps tab there. And so thank you guys for being with us today. Thank you, Tim. God bless you. Jeff Robinson, Tim Flowers, here in the studio, signing off. We'll see you on Sunday.